Hello and welcome to this Astranti video. Now this is a highlights video. So this is something a bit different from what we normally do. But I don't know if you're about to sit your ACCA Strategic Business Leader exam. If you are, you may be getting a little bit nervous. You may be thinking, I don't know how best to spend my time before the exam. Well, luckily for you, you're in exactly the right place. This video is perfect for you because you're going to gain a really strong understanding of the pre-scene. Now, I mentioned it's a highlights video, and that's because it's going to be showing you the highlights from 3 videos. Well, in fact, it's actually from a series of 5 videos that we here at Astranti have prepared for you on this forthcoming pre-scene. Now, the videos themselves, as I've mentioned, are a series of 5. The first 3 are a line-by-line analysis of the pre-scene, drawing out all the most important bits of information and explaining any areas that you may be a little bit uncertain by. So, let's take a first look at the highlight from the pre-scene analysis. And you can see there are about 11 risks and threats faced by football clubs in Ireland. The first one is a performance-related risk. What happens if a team performs really badly? And that poor performance obviously has knock-on threats and challenges that we've kind of mentioned throughout this video so far. Because poor performance can lead to less people coming to watch the match. It can lead to lower prize money. It can lead to reduced fan engagement. And of course, that all directly impacts on revenue streams. Now, we've talked about these risks, and we've also mentioned really the ways to mitigate those risks, which are a number of techniques. So it may involve in investing in player development, investing in coaching, may involve investing in performance analytics so your team become more competitive. There's a lot of talk about small gains. So teams focusing on the minutiae to improve their on-field performance. So really performance echoes throughout the entire club, all the little changes you can make to make yourself more competitive. And of course, another one we've talked about, which I'm not going to put on the screen, because we've talked about it a lot in this video, is to really have a strong academy so that you always have a good conveyor belt of talent coming through the ranks, which is always going to bolster good team performance. The second risk are competitive pressures. So we know there's other better teams than Athletic Central in the league, so there's a rival for resources. There's a rivalry, for talent to try and purchase the best players. So we're locked in a competition with other clubs to try and get the prize money, to try and lure fans to the stadium, to try and lure sponsors to sponsor the stadium, and we know that talent is a premium. So the better players are going to cost more money, so we have to be in a position to be able to afford them. Now, a way to mitigate this risk is clubs should differentiate themselves through unique value propositions, both to fans and sponsors, as well as implementing effective talent management strategies so they can attract and retain top players and staff. The next challenge are sponsorship challenges. Of course, if your club's not doing too well or you've got a problem with your reputation, then it makes sense, doesn't it, that sponsors are going to think, well, hold on a minute, these guys aren't going on TV much, they're losing their fan engagement, they're not perceived very well. We want to sponsor a better, more positively perceived club. So it's really important that clubs maintain strong performance as well as a positive brand image. Okay, the next challenge is player and staff turnover. So losing key players, losing management, losing coaching staff to rivals. in effect. So it's really important that the team isn't destabilised because, of course, losing a key member of the coaching staff or management team can fracture the team, dynamics, can fracture the team performance. So it's really important to develop a strong club culture. Make sure the clubs offer a competitive compensation packages, because even if a player comes through and loves the club, we've seen time and time and again that they will move to get a better financial package, as well as, of course, seeing that their team is competing for the top. They want to perform to the best of their abilities, so they want to be at the teams that are challenging for titles, challenging for cups. One of the problems that Leeds have had in recent years is they've got a really good crop of under 21 players, but they've got a strong first team, squad. Well, there's nowhere for these young players to go. They're not going to play in the game, so they kind of have to sit in the under-21s playing, hoping for a break. Well, of course, there comes to a point where they think, we're too good to be playing the under-21s. We want to go and get a chance in a different team. So it's really important that a clear career progression path is shown so teams don't lose top talent. Okay, the next risk is injury-related setbacks, because, of course, you might have a top player scoring loads and loads of goals. They run onto the pitch one day, they snap their Achilles tendon, and you don't see them again for 6 months. You don't have another good enough striker, and your team starts to plummet through the league, gets knocked out of the cup, and then we can see that can snowball. So it's really important that the team invests in medical, fitness and rehabilitation facilities, but also has a strong depth of squad in order to mitigate these risks. Okay, the next threat is media and broadcasting income fluctuations. So here we've got kind of two threats really. Decreased in appeal, maybe because the team's not performing well and hasn't performed well for a long time. And the second threat is illegal streaming. And both of these threats are going to impact the income from television to a club. So, a way to mitigate this risk is to make sure you have an excellent matchday experience, as well as exploring digital media opportunities to try and counterbalance these challenges. And the next threat is external competition. So other businesses seeking sponsorship, other sports, other entertainment events, and alternative forms of corporate hospitality. So here the club is going to be challenged by attracting and retaining fans in a very competitive environment. And so in order to combat this, clubs have to innovate in fan engagement and explore new revenue streams, such as esports or unique event offerings. Okay, so the next threat is one we've talked about already. That's breaching the regulations, getting a points deduction, or another worse form of punishment. We've talked about the ways to mitigate this. Making sure there's good financial accounting, transparent accountancy practices, etc., etc. The next two threats kind of belong together: damage to club brand and negative media coverage of the personal lives of players. Now, we've already talked about this brand and reputation risks. Negative coverage can have a really long-lasting impact on how a club is perceived. So it's really important there's proactive public relations in place, as well as effective crisis management plans, again, which we looked at in the previous video. The next risk and threat are health and safety risks. And I'm also going to put in the next one as well, security risks arising from poor behaviour by supporters. We saw things like this happening at the beginning of the Euros. The final was held at kind of the most famous stadium in England, Wembley, and fans without tickets, I should say, charged in, climbed in through windows before kickoff. Some fights, some skirmishes to be able to watch the game. Now, if that's happening in the biggest stadium in England, one of the most important matches that England has ever held, then of course it's something that could happen at all levels of the game, wherever it is. And making sure the safety and security of fans and staff during matches and events is really important. So it's vital that clubs implement a comprehensive security measures, as well as promoting a culture of respect amongst supporters. It's really important to mitigate these risks that we see. And our final risk, our financial risks. Economic fluctuations can really impact on a club's financial stability. So it's really important that clubs diversify their revenue streams, maintain liquidity reserves, and prudent financial management can also shield clubs from market volatilities. So there we go. There are risks and threats, as well as ways to mitigate them. Now, there are a number of tools and models you'll have come across in the ACCA syllabus, which would aid you in kind of navigating the large amount of risk and threats faced by football clubs. I would suggest the Enterprise Risk Management Framework. It's probably the most comprehensive and effective tool in this scenario. It's particularly suited for this task because it offers a holistic approach to identifying, assessing, managing, and monitoring risks across the entire organization. Using ERM and looking at, let's take the first one, loss of income through poor performance. ERM would probably suggest continually monitoring team performance, continually monitoring fan engagement levels and financial indicators, and this would allow for timely intervention if one is needed, maybe by adjusting marketing strategies or perhaps investing in player development programs. If we take another threat, the next one down, competition from other clubs, so the competitive pressure. Well, ERM would recommend diversifying income sources and enhancing the club's value proposition to fans and sponsors, so by reducing reliance on any single revenue stream and strengthening competitive positioning. So there we go, lots of tools, but I would suggest the ERM in this case. So there we go, that's risk and threats. Now we can move down to stakeholders. Okay, so we can scroll down to stakeholders, and we can see here the pre-scene has given us a variety of stakeholders. We've got internal stakeholders, shareholders, directors, players, team managers, coaching staff, and other employees. And then key stakeholders include supporters, retail customers, broadcasters, commercial sponsors, merchandise suppliers, the police, emergency services, the Football League. So we can see here that we've got a really diverse range of groups of varying interests, and each of these groups are going to have varying levels of influence over the club's operation. So we've got a really complex group of stakeholders to manage. So one thing we can do to help manage this complex group is to apply the stakeholder mapping tool. And of course, what we're going to do then is categorize the various groups based on their power and levels of concern regarding the club, so their influence. And then what that helps us do is devise tailored strategies for engaging with each stakeholder group effectively. And the first group we can put up are those with high power and a high interest. So you can see they're over the shareholders, the directors, and the players. Now with shareholders and directors, they're primary decision makers. They've got significant investments in the club. And so they require direct involvement in strategic decisions and regular detailed communication. Now another high group are the players, the team managers, and the coaching staff, because they are vital to the club's core activities, and so they, or those groups, need to be closely engaged with clear communication channels for feedback and for involvement in decisions affecting team performance and welfare. So our strategies here will be regular strategic meetings with them, performance reviews, and open forums for feedback. Now the next group I want to highlight, the television broadcasters. With high power, and that should read low interest. Now we know from this case study so far that these stakeholders, the television broadcasters, the commercial sponsors, let's highlight those as well, provide essential revenue, but they're not going to be involved in day-to-day operations like we just saw with the previous group, like the directors or the shareholders or the players. Their interest lies in the club's market visibility and their performance, because that impacts on their return of investment. So you don't need to update them so much. You don't need to keep them in the loop quite so much as the group that we just saw, but you do want to give them kind of insights into future plans in order to maintain their investment and sponsorship interest. Now, a group that probably doesn't see themselves as low power are supporters, but they would be classed as low power but high interest. Now that's because the fans don't have any direct power over the operational decisions, but we know, don't we, how vital they are for the club's finance and brand success. And so their high interest in the club's performance necessitates the club actively engaging with them. Now I've already had this morning 3 little messages from Leeds popping up on my phone saying, hey, watch this new training session. Here's the latest industry news. They're always keeping me interested. They're always letting me know what's going on, but not really am I engaging with their strategy or taking part in anything. I'm just being kept abreast of what's happening at the club. And that's because as supporters, we don't have low power. Even when clubs are really unhappy with their ownership, you see supporters complaining a lot about them, but really that protest only manifests itself in banners held up at grounds, and sometimes they march to the grounds as protest, but then of course go into the ground, pay for the tickets to watch the game, pay for all the things at the ground. So that protest really doesn't do a lot to change any strategic decision making. And then we have our low power and low interest. And these would be some people like our merchandise suppliers or the police or the emergency suppliers. Sorry, the emergency services, pardon me. Now we know, don't we, that these groups have specific operational interactions with the club, so they're really important. But they don't require or even expect deep engagement with the club's strategic core. So basically here, you just give periodic updates. You'd consult on operational needs and changes, but that would be as far as you would need to go. So there we go. That was the pre-scene analysis. 3 videos really getting to the detail of the pre-scene. But there's 2 more videos in this series, and the first of those is the strategic analysis video. Now, one of the key elements of this ACCA SBL exam is that you are able to use key models, key theories, key tools when analysing your company. Now, that can be a really hard thing to do when you've just learned about the company, when you've just found out who they are. So here at Astranti, we've done the hard work for you, and that's what you're going to find in this clip from our strategic analysis video. Now, I know you're going to be familiar with a lot of these models, and really the focus of this exam obviously isn't to teach you these models, but to kind of apply them to AT, to the case study, to the info we've seen, hopefully to stir up some ideas for you before you sit the exam, and kind of help prepare you as best we possibly can. So let's begin with something that we focus a lot on. It's something we focused quite a lot on in our previous video, and that is the mission and vision statement. So, as we know, a mission statement really should sum up clearly and concisely why the organization exists, for whom it exists, and what the organization hopes to achieve long term. Now, I put the mission on screen again. I know we spent a fair amount of time on this in the previous video. AT's mission is to maintain its position as one of the leading clubs in Thailand. Now, in the previous video, I suggested that it wasn't a very clear, ambitious, or concise mission statement. But I think what we do know is why the organization exists. It's a football club or a soccer club, depending on where you live, that aims to be one of the leading clubs in Thailand. Now, one of the suggestions that I made in the previous video was actually we could have been a bit more specific with this mission statement, because one of the leading clubs is a little bit vague. Does it mean in league position? Does it mean in amount of fans it gets through its turnstiles every weekend? What exactly does it mean? And looking at how prize money is weighted, the entrance to competitions, I suggested like a top 4 or a top 3 league position would be a more concise mission statement. So it'd be something like AT's mission would be to become and remain one of the top 4, top 3 clubs in Thailand. And I think what that would do would show you where the organization wants to go. Now, at the moment, it's saying it wants to maintain its position. Well, as we saw in the pre-scene, I think we could argue whether actually it is one of the leading clubs. Certainly in the top 8 league positions we saw, it was at the bottom of that table. It hasn't been particularly successful recently. It doesn't have the biggest stadium. It does have a high fan percentage going to its games, but the stadium is small compared with the other 7 teams in the top 8. So the next question we're really focusing on here is how will the organisation compete and the range of businesses it is operating within. Well, we know to be successful, AT has to win prize money. It has to attract fans. It has to attract sponsors. It has to attract people wanting to buy its merchandise. And so one of the ways it's going to compete is to actually literally compete well in the game of football and get higher up the table, do well in cup competitions, etc., etc., get on television more. It's obviously a very competitive industry it's in, and it's facing some very strong competition. And then we can look at the values. Now, we also saw the values, which feature quite heavily. The value statement talking about transparency with stakeholders, community engagement, because of course a vital aspect of a football club is really becoming incredibly strong brand and partner to attract your fans, to attract even more fans, but make sure the current fans you have no cause to not want to buy tickets, have no cause to wave banners about the stand saying out with the current ownership, etc. And then another thing we can talk about here are the policies, and these are the policies an organization has to ensure that the people connected to the organization act in the correct way according to values, strategies, and purposes. Now, we saw a few kind of almost policies, I would say, in the value statement when we talked about how making sure that players conduct themselves in a certain way so they represent the brand of AT in the correct way, how they're going to look after their younger footballing stars in the safeguarding to make sure they have a safe environment in which to play. There was a kind of famous case in England a few years ago where it was found that an academy system had not looked after its young people very well. In fact, had done quite the opposite and put them in positions of serious risk and had failed at safeguarding. So it's of the utmost importance. So there we go. There's the mission. As I say, we looked at the mission quite a lot in the previous video, but hopefully it's raising awareness to you that actually we could be a little bit tighter in that mission statement. We could probably be a little bit tighter in our strategy moving forward. Okay. So we've looked at the mission. Now it'd be really good to use a tool or a model that helps translate the mission and the values and the vision into a set of performance measures. And luckily we have just a ticket, and you can see it on screen. That's the balanced scorecard. So the aim of us using the balanced scorecard is to help Athletic Transcentral gain insight into its overall performance beyond its financial outcomes, with the aim of aligning operations with strategic objectives. And by doing this, it's going to allow AT to monitor its achievements and identify any areas for improvement across various aspects of its operations. And as we're all aware, I am sure, the balanced scorecard is divided up into 4 sections. And I've got those 4 sections on screen. And in the financial perspective, we've got the EBITDA and the revenue breakdown. So with total revenue growth, we saw that revenues had increased slightly over the last few years. So we're seeing positive growth. But although only gradual, it does reflect the club's ability to increase its income streams over time. But earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation and amortization declined from just under 60 million to just under 30 million. And I think that really highlights the need for cost management and operational efficiency improvements. And the third thing I put in financial perspective is the revenue breakdown. That's where we saw the different types of revenue. And it indicated to us a broad base of income sources that are crucial for financial stability. And it also showed we're perhaps a little bit dependent on the television broadcast. Okay, the next element I'm going to be looking at is the internal business process perspective. And in there I put operational efficiency, because we've seen a decline in the earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. So that suggests challenges in operational efficiency. So streamlining operations, especially in cost-heavy areas, could be a focus. And I've also put compliance with the financial fair play regulations, which is, of course, the football regulation, making sure people don't spend beyond their means. Now, we saw the relevant earnings for this were at $20 million in the current season, and that had reduced from $60 million, I think 3 years earlier. And that indicates a tighter financial operation, and that could impact on us investing in players and investing in facilities. The next perspective I want to look at is the learning perspective, and in there I put employee and player development. The club's commitment to safeguarding and players' conduct points towards a culture that really values growth and ethical conduct. Investment in training facilities and youth development programs are indicators of long-term talent development strategies, and we saw that we'd invested in our training facilities about 5 years previous. And the next thing I put on is innovation in fan engagement. So here we're talking about utilizing digital platforms for fan engagement and expanding the club's retail presence online. They're really important for growth and adapting to changing market developments, which leaves us with customer perspective. And on there I have fan engagement and satisfaction. So we can gauge fan engagement from the matchday revenues and retail sales. Now, it's important to note, although we do have one of the smallest stadiums in the top 8, if not the smallest, we are considered at full capacity. So we are engaging with fans. It does indicate that there is room for growth or sale. Initiatives to enhance fan experiences, both on match day and through merchandise, would be pertinent factors here, as well as brand strength and sponsorship deals. And we can see with our sponsorship revenue, it really indicates strong brand recognition and value, and that's really important for attracting and retaining our commercial partners. So there we go. That is a balanced scorecard. And hopefully what this enables us to do is to align AT's strategic objectives with performance metrics across the 4 perspectives. And by having this holistic view, we can target improvements, make sure there's strategic alignment, and promote sustainable growth by balancing the short-term financial performance with longer-term strategic goals. And for AT, that means focusing on operational efficiency, diversifying revenue streams, enhancing fan engagement, and committing to continuous improvement and innovation in all areas. They're the key issues in achieving and sustaining competitive advantage. So, okay, so that's the balanced scorecard. We can zoom out now, and our next heading is governance. Okay, so in governance, I'm going to put on a list of elements that are generally considered good governance. So separation of chairman and CEO, independent NEDs, audit, nomination and remuneration committees, risk management focus, disclosure of directors' pay, financial reporting and control, information for directors, involvement of all the directors in decision making, regular meetings with institutional shareholders, and good use of AGMs. So let's have a quick run through of these good governance elements and see how AT is faring. Well, the first one is separate chairman and CEO. Well, there's no explicit mention of a separate chairman and CEO in the pre-scene, so that could be a concern for governance clarity and leadership structure. Secondly, the independent NEDs. Well, we've seen in the pre-scene AT does include NEDs on its board, and that really does align with good governance practices to ensure there's independent oversight. Now, the only committee that was mentioned is the audit committee, and that's staffed by non-executive directors. That's a really positive sign that AT is committed to financial oversight and internal controls, and again, that aligns with good governance. But again, the pre-scene didn't mention the other two committees, so they are areas where AT may enhance its governance structure. The next point is risk management focus. Now, there's no mention at all of any specific dedicated risk management framework or committee. That's an area for improvement for AT. And again, there's no explicit mention of directors' pay disclosure, and that's key transparency aspect in governance. And remember, transparency was one of AT's values as well. Financial reporting and control. Well, the audit committee's role in reviewing financial statements indicates there is a focus on financial reporting and control. The next is information for directors to facilitate good decision making. Well, we know that there are detailed responsibilities for each director, and that does suggest that AT more than likely provides necessary information for informed decision making. Staying with directors, where we can see in the board structure, we've got financial directors. They're going to be involved in strategic decisions because of the areas that they're concerned with, and that aligns with good governance practices. And the final two are regular meetings with institutional shareholders and AGM use. Well, the pre-scene doesn't detail AT's practices regarding shareholder engagement or the use of AGMs for transparency and accountability. So, as we covered in the pre-scene videos, there's a good board structure at AT, and there's indications of good governance, but rooms for improvement. So let's go and have a look at those rooms for improvement. So let's check out governance. So as I've already mentioned, there are some good indications from AT that they are demonstrating good governance practices, most notably through its audit committee and the inclusion of non-executive directors. Now, these elements contribute to oversight, independence, and accountability within the organisation. But, as mentioned, there are areas for improvement, especially regarding the separation of the chairman and CEO roles, a dedicated focus on risk management, and enhanced through transparency, through disclosures of directors' pay and active shareholder engagements. So what can we do to remedy this situation at AT? Well, firstly, we could clarify roles within the leadership, possibly by appointing a separate chairman and CEO in order to avoid conflicts of interest and enhance strategic oversight. We could develop a comprehensive risk management framework with dedicated oversight, potentially through a risk management committee, and we could improve transparency, implement more transparent practices regarding directors' pay, and engage more actively with shareholders, including through regular meetings and effective use of the AGM. So there we go. That's how AT's governance would benefit from enhancements to align more closely with best practices and address areas of weakness. Okay, that's governance. Let's zoom back out now. So there we go. That was our strategic analysis video, but we have one more. And this is one of our most popular videos. This is our top 10 video issues. So in this top 10 video, we identify what we think, using our expertise and our experience, what we think are the most likely issues to appear in the exam based on our analysis of the case study. And then what we do in this video is we highlight to you the issue's relevance. Then we kind of come up with some ideas of how the examiners may test that information, what forms the questions may take. And then we show you which bits of the case study we would look to answer those questions most effectively. Take a look. So let's start with financial management and sustainability. And the relevance here is it's key to sections on financial strategy, risk management and sustainability, focusing on the financial health of the organization and its long-term viability. And in the pre-scene, we saw a fair bit of the pre-scene talked about the decline in earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. And also we saw that although revenue was increasing, that was starting to slow, and we were seeing concerns about long-term sustainability issues. So let's have a look at some likely scenarios. Well, one scenario may be that you're asked to tackle scenarios involving financial turnaround strategies, cost management initiatives, or revenue diversification plans to restore Athletic Transcentral's financial health. Now, we've talked about the opportunities for Athletic Transcentral to expand its revenues in quite a lot of detail. We saw the breakdown of the income streams. We saw that it's heavily reliant on television broadcast, but we've seen there's lots of opportunities for increasing its revenue, whether that's in new markets abroad, leveraging our brand, or in new sponsorship situations. Now, of course, a key point to the financial management and sustainability for Athletic Transcentral, for the football clubs especially, is because of the regulations regarding FFPR, making sure that clubs aren't spending over their means. So it's not like the club can go out and decide, well, we want to perform really well, we're going to go and spend huge amounts of money on all the best strikers or midfielders, because eventually we would fall foul of the regulations and we would face sanctions. And so another scenario might be that you are asked to come up with a compliance strategy ensuring that AT remains compliant but also competitive. Okay, now let's turn to the key points to raise. Well, firstly, we've talked about a couple of them. The first thing is there's a steady revenue growth. Now, revenue is growing. So it's not like we've got to have a total turnaround straight away. There are things that are going correctly, but as we've seen, our earnings are down And because of the industry that we're in, the FFPR regulations are really tight, looking at our 3 years of relevant income and expenditure. So what we're going to be looking at here are the areas of the pre-scene that would enable us to increase our income streams and expand our revenue. I've already talked about a couple of those, and we've talked about them in much greater detail in the pre-scene. So they're the key points to raise in terms of financial management and sustainability. So now let's drop down to the next point, which is infrastructure investment. So the relevance here to the strategic business leader syllabus is that it relates to investment decision making and strategic asset management, which you find in section F. And of course, what we saw in the pre-scene was the challenges that AT was facing when we were looking at its aging infrastructure. So the likely scenario in this case may be that you are asked to evaluate the return on investment on stadium improvements. We saw the top 4 teams in Carland had improved its stadium, and we saw from that they had almost double the capacity in the crowds, and also it meant they could host other functions. And of course, another scenario is exploring alternative uses of the club's facilities to generate additional revenue. Now, we did see in the pre-scene that the stadium was really limited by its current setup. So that would also be something you have to bear in mind. Now, the key points to raise from this section are to do with the aging stadium, especially when you compare it to the new training facility, or the relatively new training facility that's been built, and what a lure that is. Well, in the aging stadium, not only is it not helping us in terms of income and our revenue, but also about our brand as well. What does it say about us as a football club that we're getting half the capacity of the other kind of top 5 competitors in the country? Another thing to note was the extra land. So the good news is that AT own the land on the stadium, and that's a really big bonus. I don't want to talk about Leeds too much in this video, but for years we didn't own our stadium, and so our owners would charge exorbitant rents to the club, and it meant you could never compete because you weren't getting the income for the stadium and you're paying huge amounts of rent. So that's a really beneficial thing. But also, the fact it owns the extra land adjacent to the stadium, well, that suggests, doesn't it, that there is possibility for expansion of the stadium. And if not expansion to the stadium, there's definitely possibilities for improving the infrastructure around the stadium. And remember, that was causing friction with our local stakeholders. And as I mentioned briefly in the previous section, of course, it did mention in the pre-scene that our competitors are able to put on concerts, host other sporting events, and yet we seem to be limited to our football match days. And of course, apart from cup in the league, there's only 18 home games a season. So we've got this huge piece of real estate sitting in the middle of the city that we're not using for vast chunks of the year. So there we go. There are my key points to raise regarding the infrastructure investment. Okay, so let's move on to our next issue, which is competitive advantage and performance management. Now, this relates to the SBL syllabus. It's central to strategic positioning, competitive advantage, which feature in section C and E and F of the SBL syllabus, focusing on understanding the complete forces and crafting strategies which are going to help Athletic Transcentral retain its competitive edge. And of course, we saw this quite a lot in the pre-scene, that although Athletic Transcentral has a history of success, actually recently it's underperformed compared to leading clubs in terms of its performance in the league, its performance in cup competitions, its performance not being able to get into the European leagues, and of course also in how it doesn't have such a big attendance as its other competitors, how its stadium isn't as big. Okay, so let's go and look at the likely scenarios you're going to be asked to talk about. And the first one I put up is strategic repositioning, because what a scenario may ask you to do is to propose a strategic repositioning plan so that Athletic Transcentral can improve its standing within the league. Now, within this could be strategies for talent development, financial restructuring, or brand enhancement. So, for example, we've talked a fair bit throughout these videos about talent development, about harnessing youth players in order to try and create this kind of conveyor belt of talent for the top team. And that would mean, for the first team. And that would mean that either the first team starts to perform better and isn't doing so badly, or it means you've got a ready-made conveyor belt of products to sell for high value, which you can then sink back into the club. The second likely scenario I've put on screen is performance improvement initiatives. So what you may be asked to do here is to come up with initiatives about various ways in which the Athletic Transcentral's performance can be improved. And that again really links back to this idea of what does the first team need to perform and the snowball effect of that throughout the organisation. Okay, and the key issues in the text, firstly, of course, is the historic success versus recent underperformance. It's not like we're a new club that doesn't have any brand awareness, that doesn't have a loyal fan base, that doesn't have a history of success. We do have this. So in a sense, we've got all this past, this prestige, waiting to be harnessed. But to harness it, we just need this new element of success to kind of galvanize the team again. As I said, I'm not going to talk about Leeds too much in this video, but we went through a long period of being unsuccessful. Crowd attendances were down. Even though we kind of had this really successful past in the 60s and 70s, we were thought of as the best team in the world. We had success with the last team to win the old First Division before it turns into the Premiership. And then we qualified for the Champions League in the early 2000s. So we've had this history of success. Then we were down in the doldrums for a while. And to be fair, Athletic Transcentral hasn't fallen as far as we did. And then we had a new manager come along that totally galvanized the team, got us performing well. We became competitive in the leagues. We shot up into the Premiership, and we finished 9th in the first season, which is pretty unheard of. And because of that, the fan base, this kind of fan base which had been slumbering for years, started flooding back to the stadium. Suddenly you couldn't buy a ticket, whereas before you could walk up to the stadium on match day and buy a ticket. Now you had to join this membership program, which I've spoken about. You had to pay £100 a year just to even think, or for the opportunity of buying a ticket if one came available. So it goes to show we have the past, we've got the prestige. We just need to make ourselves competitive again so that we can succeed. And another element just to kind of highlight this recent underperformance in the pre-scene was the league finishes, just showing us that we're at the bottom of the top 8. And obviously it could be worse, but I think seeing that the other teams in the top 8 had these bigger stadiums, had these bigger revenue incomes, and also us seeing our earnings are decreasing, I think we've got to come up with a strategy of performance, which means we can compete sustainably. Otherwise, we could fall even further behind quite easily. And just to back this up, we haven't qualified for any international tournaments recently, so we're not gaining any prize money for that. And although we have an under-18 team, we don't have an academy like the top teams, and we have to assume from what was said in the pre-scene that those players that came up through the academy ranks from the age of 9 had professionalised coaching and access to educational development to a much higher degree than those teams that don't have an academy. And I think that's something really important to bear in mind when we're talking about trying to make ourselves competitive from a playing point of view, Well, how do we do that without breaking the bank? Well, step number one, we make sure our academy or our young team are being exposed to the best possible coaching to give us the best possible chance. And by doing that, we should have an academy. Okay, so there we go. That is looking at our competitive advantage and performance management. So there we go. There's our top 10 issues, and there's our video focus on the ACCA SBL. Really analysing the pre-scene and then applying all the key models, the key theories, and then demonstrating to you what we think is most likely to come up in your exam. Now, to accompany these 3 videos, we also produce an industry analysis. Now, this is a large document that's going to explain to you everything you need to know about the industry. In this case, of course, the football industry. And alongside that, we've also prepared 2 mock exams to make sure that you can practice using your newfound knowledge before you come to the exam. I can hear you asking, where do I get this from? How much does it cost? Well, I'm delighted to tell you that it is free, and all you have to do to sign up for the remaining videos and the industry analysis text is to sign up with Astranti and to access it through the StudyHUB, or just follow the link in the description. Remember, they are absolutely free, so what have you got to lose? Once again, thank you so much for watching today's video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the videos once you're signed up. Thank you.